Hi there and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about a village in Alentejo which was raided by the GNR. It's a notorious village which is basically more than 50% populated by migrants. The name of this village is Sao Teotonio in Odimaira. I've probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but I do try. And it is located in Alentejo. Now, this is a region of Portugal which has a lot of migrants. Most of them come from India, Nepal, and Bangladesh at the moment, and predominantly they're engaged in agriculture. Basically, these are the guys who are picking the berries, and red berries are a famous crop in this particular area, and I'm sure other kinds of fruits in other parts of Alentejo or just agriculture generally. This is a village which has been previously reported on by major news organisations in Portugal, including Publico. And there is another area nearby called Vila de Milfontes, which is basically in the same kind of predicament and also has these kind of reports. Essentially, what has happened here is that you've seen the transformation of these villages from traditional Portuguese rural communities into communities which have come to be dominated, where 50-60% of the population is now composed of immigrants, predominantly male immigrants, young male immigrants, who come from Nepal, Bangladesh, or India, these kind of countries. During the raid by the GNR, dozens of people and about a dozen businesses were actually inspected. And it wasn't just the GNR, there were various other agencies involved in this operation. And there were 39 people who were actually charged with administrative offences in this instance, including 14 who were charged with illegal entry or presence in Portugal. 12 who were charged with road offences, including, it was pointed out, not driving with a driving licence or driving without a licence, and 13 people who were cited for other kinds of offences, general administrative breaches. It says it's not specified what. To my mind, it's not really very unexpected that if the GNR and other agencies went into these kind of migrant-dominated communities, they're going to find a lot of illegality. It doesn't shock me at all, because when you have such a concentration of migrants from different communities, they do tend to kind of take over the local area, and that's something we'll touch on later when we talk about what the mayor has to say. And they basically, in many cases, tend to want to bring their own rules and their own way of life with them. And of course, in the developing world, you have many countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and India, where the rule of law is not exactly sacrosanct in the same way that it is in Europe or in Portugal. There's much more flexibility about it, and of course a lot of people take the attitude that violating the law doesn't really matter, we don't need to do that, we won't be caught. Now, of course, I'm not saying that there are no Portuguese criminals, of course there are, but in these communities, at least in my opinion, I think that it's fair to say that legal compliance isn't exactly fantastic. And if the GNR and other agencies go into any of these kind of migrant communities in Portugal, or indeed in any European country, they're going to find a whole cornucopia of violations, such as they did. Now, the mayor of Vila de Milfontes obviously isn't very happy about this, and he has indicated in an interview that he feels that although there's been an influx of migrants to the area in recent years, over the last decade, there hasn't been a parallel rise in funding. In fact, there's been a reduction in funding from the central government, and it's led to the fact that local services are actually deteriorating and they're receiving less money than they were, despite the fact that the population has risen and there are so many more migrants, who many of whom don't speak Portuguese, that create extra difficulty and extra burden on these services. So it's very difficult to cope. He also points out that, at least in his opinion, organised crime is behind the influx of migrants to the area, and that there are gangs operating, basically charging new immigrants 15,000 to 20,000 euros to come to Portugal to work, and when those migrants get here, they're then put to work by those same gangs working in Alentejo's agricultural industry. I guess, although I don't have deep insight to this, I guess that what happens is that most migrants can't actually afford the initial payment for things like their flight or however they get to Portugal and their accommodation, etc., etc., and they end up getting involved with these agents or gangs, and the agent or gang will turn around and say to them, well, you don't have to pay so much money up front. What will happen is we can take you there, but when you get there, you have to work for us basically for a number of years. So it's basically like a form of indentured servitude. And I think a number of Nepalese and Indian immigrants, I've seen interviews with them in various media complaining about this kind of exploitation. The fact that they're actually being exploited by other Indians, Nepalese and Bangladeshis who got there first, and they're basically putting them to work for very, very low wages essentially until this debt has been repaid. And this is common practice for how these kind of people smuggling rings operate. The mayor also pointed out that what has been witnessed is a takeover of homes and businesses in the town, and that it has led to a massive increase in rent levels, and that Portuguese people or foreigners just can't afford to buy or rent there because these migrant groups are basically renting any property that they can get their hands on. They're renting a restaurant, for example, a small restaurant, paying 8,000 euros a month in rent for it. It's just an impossible price for most Portuguese owners to contemplate running a restaurant if they have to pay that kind of rent. Or they are renting 2-bedroom apartments and they're filling it full of like 15 to 20 guys in bunk beds, and they're charging each person 100 euros to 120 euros to live there for a month, and that's how they're making money out of this. And all the while they're doing this, the gangs are on social media trying to recruit more people into the scheme and just bring more and more and more people over. So the population of migrants rises to a level where Portuguese, as the article points out, are now a minority in their own town. And I can tell you that many Portuguese don't feel comfortable with that, mainly because most of the migrants are young males, and there have been problems regarding the attitude of the recent migrants to Portuguese females, particularly young Portuguese females, by which I mean children. There's a guy who runs the local laundrette in the town, and he has a 25-year-old daughter who is working there, and he basically says that he cannot leave his daughter alone in the shop because there will be crowds of migrants at the windows whistling and banging on the windows and things like that. It's just very, very scary to have to work in that kind of context. I really can't imagine how bad that would be. Many parents have also commented that they tell their children, if they're female children, you can't go to the beach, you can't wear a bikini, you can't wear a swimsuit, in the summer don't wear short skirts because you'll be harassed. And stalking and sexual harassment are really a big problem in these areas. A guy called Francisco Lamprea, I hope I got his name right, actually did a survey of the class, basically. And he asked the girls, have you been followed? Have you been stalked by migrants in the community? And every single one of them said yes. Every single one of them had been followed. Half of them had been stopped and asked for their number by the migrants, or basically engaged in conversation with them, like, hi, how are you? Do you want to get to know me better? And in one case, the girl was only 12 years old. So this really shows you the extent of the problem. Anyone from the UK would be familiar with this kind of thing. They've probably heard of the Rochdale sex grooming case where Asian males basically took advantage of dozens and dozens of white underage girls to groom them for sexual activities. It's a particularly disgusting case in the UK. And I think it's reflective of a social attitude. It may also be a religious attitude, because many of the immigrants in this town are in fact Muslim, and one of the local buildings has now been converted into a mosque. But it really worries me, and I think it worries local residents in these towns as well, that you're seeing, their daughters being stalked on the street, and grown men are asking children for their numbers in Portugal. I think that that's appalling. I mean, this is not something which should be considered a cultural difference or something that we should tolerate or anything like that. It's just shocking. These local people are basically being driven out of their town. Financially and culturally, they're being made to feel uncomfortable there. And in the case of females, especially young females who are resident in the community, it may not actually be safe. I mean, if you can't go to work without being harassed by a crowd of guys, or if your daughter can't go to the beach, or if she can't even go to school without being followed home, how terrible is that, and how bad does it have to become before something is done? So I welcome the fact that the GNR carried out a raid in this village. If they really want to stop stuff like the stalking going on, they need a lot more GNR on the streets just to observe the situation and create an atmosphere of safety. I think it's utterly terrible that we have Portuguese people living in fear of sending their kids to school in 2024 because of the presence of migrants in their community, because their community has basically been taken over by a migrant population. And people are going to say, oh, in Alentejo we really need these people to pick the berries. Well, how important are berries? How important is agriculture? And how important is public safety? I think you need to weigh these kind of things. Some other commentators have told me, we need these people, they're vital for the economy. I'm not sure that that's the case. I can't really think of any economy which ever became rich and prosperous or developed on the back of agriculture. I suppose it's possible, but I think it's unlikely. So I think Portugal really needs to rethink its policies on immigration, particularly immigration from the developing world, and they have to focus on who are they bringing in and what kind of social transformation is that going to cause, what kind of dangers is that going to pose for Portuguese residents. That should be the focus. Alright, well, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope people found it interesting and informative, and I'll see you soon in the next one.